Lily Viggiano brings 12 years of experience in volunteer engagement to her role as Intergenerational Initiatives Manager at Volunteer Canada, where she mobilizes people from coast to coast to coast to work toward a common good across generations. Inspired by her family's belief that service and kindness make communities thrive, Lily started volunteering young, from launching her own neighborhood cleanup in elementary school to founding EPYC, Empowering Proactive Youth in Communities. For her, volunteering creates the purpose, belonging, and meaningful connections that flourish when people come together around shared passions. Welcome and thank you for coming, Lily.
Great. Thank you, Doris, for having me and introducing me. And I'm really looking forward to talking about volunteer engagement with all of you folks tonight. So I will start with my introduction. So a little bit more about myself. I've been working at Volunteer Canada for about half a year. I kind of bridge the gap between research and practice and bring that together so that I can support the capacity building of nonprofits and grassroots organizations across Canada. It's been really fun so far, and I feel like it pulls on the experience that I've had working with young people, as well as working with community members for the last, little over a decade. Today, what we'll be talking about is, acknowledging the OHA's legacy and some of the current challenges that have been shared with me. We're going to walk through some evidence-based strategies to recruit members, to engage current members, build leadership succession, and strengthen long-term resilience. So that's kind of the quick overview of what's ahead. A little bit about Volunteer Canada. So we've been around since 1977. We're a capacity building organization. We advocate for policy changes in government. We work to speak with decision makers and funders on behalf of nonprofit organizations. And then, we work closely with local volunteer centers and nonprofit groups across Canada. And a little bit about Generations Co., which is the project that I'm working on. We envision a Canada where intergenerational connection, the act of intentionally bringing people of all ages together, is vital infrastructure for resilient and inclusive communities. We do that in a couple of different ways. So research and policy advocacy, training and sector standards, field building and organizational support, and then taking all of that good knowledge, sharing it, and engaging with the public. So the first section of information that I want to share with you folks centers around recruiting and retaining members. So we've found that volunteer engagement is at a crossroads in Canada. Nonprofits report significantly fewer volunteers and difficulties retaining them post-pandemic. In 2022, a survey showed that 65% of organizations had faced a shortage of new volunteers, and 50% struggled to retain the ones that they did have. Younger volunteers are volunteering in lower numbers for shorter durations, while many older volunteers haven't returned since COVID-19. But there's lots of proven strategies to attract folks. One of them is just meeting people where they are. So offering flexible or short-term roles, really getting active digitally, and looking to really share that visible impact. For example, nonprofits have found success using social media campaigns, creating micro-volunteering projects that fit busy schedules and can adapt. And equally important is showing volunteers the difference that they make. Surveys do show that hearing how their work has benefited the cause is the #1 form of recognition that volunteers want. So if we could go back to the volunteering in a state of transition slide, just a few back. What we see there is some of the trends that were identified in the giving and volunteering survey that's done by StatsCan. We've got more information that'll be coming out about this in 2026 as a new one has come out. And in 2018, we found that 79% of Canadians 15 and older volunteered in some form. But by 2022, that formal volunteering has fallen to around 32%. So now it's at 73%. Many organizations report that older volunteers haven't fully returned after the pandemic, and younger individuals prefer ad hoc commitments over traditional long-term roles. So for example, Volunteer Canada has seen that younger generations, so Gen Z and millennials, they do volunteer at relatively high rates, but at much lower numbers. They contribute fewer on average. And in 2022, our sector survey found that more than half of organizations struggled to recruit new volunteers. 40% have had trouble convincing past volunteers to return. And this is a common reality for nonprofits all across the country. So in that next slide, what volunteers want. When I'm thinking about wanting to engage younger volunteers, they're motivated differently than previous generations. They really want to volunteer with causes that they're passionate about. They want to gain experience, and they want to build a sense of community with their peers, but as well as with folks from different generations. But they don't always have an easy time doing that. So really where older volunteers come into play is they help set that tone and set that temperature. Young people are eager to build those networks and build that sense of community, but when they're walking into a new environment, it's really up to the people who are already there to kind of create that culture and that tone. I would also say that we've noted that 45% of volunteers across all ages cite gaining skills and experience as a reason that they volunteer. And the Forbes Nonprofit Council experts have emphasized that leveraging this by offering micro-volunteering or skill-based projects that help build resumes is another powerful mechanism to recruit people into roles. And I would say, technology is key. So I'd say that probably has a really big impact on how to recruit people. So getting the word out is one thing, but are we effectively using technology to make the onboarding process simplified and easy to understand, right? When we're recruiting volunteers to our organization, that's that first impression. That kind of gives people an idea of what their whole experience might feel like. So really from that first time that they hear about a volunteer opportunity at your societies, we want it to be engaging, simplified, and as organized as it can be. These sort of online campaigns or having a strong digital onboarding process can really help reach a more diverse audience that doesn't just rely on word of mouth or other types of traditional media that maybe has been used. So basically, one of my thoughts when I think about recruiting volunteers is you have to try a little bit of everything, see where you get that success, and lean into that. But having that positive and warm attitude throughout the process is really important with new volunteers. Some recruitment strategies that work, outside of what I just mentioned about online campaigns, is equipping passionate supporters and volunteers and members as ambassadors. So can you offer them some sort of toolkit or different resources that they can use so that they can promote opportunities at their schools, at their workplaces? They kind of know how to talk about what's needed at their society in a little short blurb, right? Encouraging people to bring family, friends, and peers. When an organization meets volunteers where they are, engagement rises. I think another important piece with engaging new volunteers is offering flexible commitments. So instead of right off the jump requiring 6 months or a year of volunteering, is there some sort of, not probationary period, but just an onboarding period where it's like, hey, come check it out, see how you feel in this experience. We're going to have you commit to 3 months, right? And really making that a little bit more bite-sized. Even just having people come for a one-day project or some micro tasks, that can be a way for them to sense if this organization of people is the sort of community that they want to be part of. And then as they show more commitment, then thinking about that volunteer trajectory and what other roles they might be able to take on. It could look like having groups of people come for a season opener, and helping out in that way, coming to close up for the season as well. I feel like those sort of one day opportunities are almost like a volunteering open house, if you will. So giving people a chance to meet the current volunteers and members and leaders at your society, and then going from there to into deeper roles. Another big piece is just showing that impact and purpose. So understanding what the tangible impact of their contribution is. You can communicate that verbally through photos, videos, sharing successes as they happen through email communications. Those really connect with a lot of people's desire to want to give back, to make an impact. It is and continues to be the top way that volunteers wish to be thanked, is hearing about how their work has made a difference. Simplifying the entry points and reducing barriers to getting involved is huge. So streamlining the process of becoming a volunteer, long application forms, slow responses, onerous screening can turn busy people away. And of course, there are cases where certain roles really do need that rigorous sort of onboarding process. And I'm not downplaying that piece, but where you can, looking and thinking about that process and simplifying it where you can is a great method of, just let people show some interest and be able to check out your organization before going through the whole process of long forms, etc. Make it as easy as possible for folks to get involved, and ultimately they can become a great ambassador for the work that you do. I would say also that opportunities for leadership and a voice can be really appealing to folks. So when I think about younger folks, youth who I've worked with for 12 years, having a sort of savvy strategy to give young people a voice in the organization is really important. So it could mean forming a youth advisory committee, adding youth positions on the board, anything that can signal that youth are decision makers within the organization. It's a great way to engage the young people who are already involved in the work that you do. And when that is communicated outwardly, it can really kind of signal to other interested young people that, hey, this is the sort of collection of people that I would love to volunteer alongside. When I'm thinking about retention strategies that work, there's quite a few. And sometimes what I've done is I've just put a couple of short blurbs on the slide, and I've got more enhanced notes that I'm reading off of. This presentation will be available to all people that have joined us today, and you'll be able to see my speaker notes as well for kind of that deeper dive into what I'm sharing on. So some things to consider to retain the great members that we have is continuing to provide orientation and training. So volunteers are more likely to stay if they feel prepared and capable in their roles. Continuing to provide warm orientation and necessary training, having a buddy or a mentor for volunteers helps them continue to integrate deeper into your organization. Retention starts on day one, and I think is a good way to think about those things. If volunteers feel lost or ineffective early on, they tend to disengage. So giving folks the tools to succeed, even a basic welcome session or clear handbook, boosts confidence and commitment. Another big thing that is important is actually having an assigned volunteer manager. A Volunteer Toronto study that was done recently for nonprofits found that nonprofits that have a volunteer manager retained 16 times more volunteers than those without. So it really just shows that having someone who's dedicated, or having multiple people who are dedicated to that onboarding process, finding volunteers, managing their experience is really, really important. And having that person help with scheduling, addressing the concern, and keeping volunteers feeling appreciated is super, super important. It's very invaluable work. So that volunteer manager should also be thinking about how to solicit feedback. So checking in with volunteers and understanding what they enjoy about the positions, where their challenges are. And when they mention challenges, how can you then improve that process and fix it, right? Or if it can't be changed, explaining why and really giving people that information so that they can feel empowered in their role. Recognition is an important part of volunteering, but beyond those formal sort of recognition events, ongoing appreciation is key. So those simple, frequent thank yous, highlighting volunteer contributions publicly, so whether in newsletters, social media spotlights, or even just within the group, it reinforces that sense of purpose. Volunteers tend to stay where they form friendships and feel a sense of community. So facilitating a sort of social element like team building gatherings, coffee chats, and peer recognition programs, those can really turn volunteering into a rewarding social outlet. Many younger volunteers report that volunteering combats their loneliness, and it helps them find like-minded people in their community. So we really have a great opportunity to provide welcoming, inclusive spaces in our volunteer programs that will then naturally improve retention. Matching volunteers to roles that fit their interests is also it's a really agile part of managing volunteers. So maybe someone walked into your organization wanting to participate in a certain way, or that's the role they signed up for, but you get to know them a little bit more and you start to understand more of their strengths. They might have a niche, a task that they excel at or care more deeply about. So if you can help navigate that and ensure that people who are interested in your general cause are then doing roles within that suit their strengths, they're going to volunteer for longer with a greater output. So something that I think about often is volunteer development plans. It's similar to in the working world where we have like staff development plans, and you think about an entry level employee and where they might grow within the organization and what kind of professional development they might need in order to get there. We can really think about our volunteers in that way as well, to help them grow into roles that they're going to love. Some common barriers that retention faces is when they feel like things are disorganized, there's a lack of resources, if they feel unsafe. So ensuring that a volunteer program is well organized with clear schedules, defined roles, a point of contact for help, it makes volunteers more likely to stick with it. And being mindful of things like out-of-pocket costs, if you can, compensating people for that can really help you access a larger community of volunteers. And my final point on retention strategies that work is just being really cautious about volunteer burnout. So don't overload the willing with too much work. Respect that they have boundaries so that they don't burn out and quit, especially for critical, long-serving volunteers. Check that they're comfortable with their workload. Offering breaks, backup support, or rotation can help sustain them. On the next slide, I've talked about a couple of ideas for consideration when we think about recruitment. I won't go too deep into these, as each group each society can think about this in more detail, and I want to be mindful of time. One thing I was, thinking about is when we're recruiting volunteers, what's in the name, either the volunteer title or even the name of your particular society. Is that an engaging title? Is that something that people feel like they are worthy of being able to participate in? If there are roles that are quite simple, communicate that, right? Do people need to be experts to sign up, or right, is there room to learn? Is learning part of the experience? Group volunteering is a great outlet, especially I think for really busy periods throughout the gardening season. Are there more ways to get involved other than the garden? I remember being in college and I wanted to hang out with people who were doing the improv club, but I didn't want to do improv. So I became their treasurer. So I'm sure there's lots of people out there like that who, they want to be part of making beautiful spaces all around Ontario, but maybe for whatever reason they don't want to get their hands in the dirt per se, but they would love to be a treasurer, have a leadership role, or participate in the organization's mission in a little bit of a different way. So we'll head over into the next piece where I'm talking a bit more about some ideas for OHA retention. So there's the idea that first impressions matter, and then there's the idea that first moments matter. So you've got someone in the door, that's great, and that's wonderful, and then every time they walk in that door, we've got those first moments that really matter. So the warm welcomes, personally inviting people to take on new roles within the organization, managing their expectations are really key to keeping people on board. Asking people to tell you a little bit more about what they're expecting and creating those volunteer development plans, maybe even having time limits on certain commitments, right? So that we don't get into a position where someone has held a role for several years, and if they step away or they're no longer able to serve in that position, things get really challenging. We'll talk a little bit more about that in my following section, but really thinking about those time limits, what it does is it encourages organizations to have better documentation. It brings in fresh perspectives, and it kind of just keeps a little bit more lifeblood going in, and you're more able to adapt when things change and people leave and new people join. So in section 2, I'm going to talk a bit more about leadership succession planning. Across the sector, it tends to be a little bit on the weak side, and that can pose a number of risks to long-term stability. Fewer than 1/3 of nonprofits actually have a formal succession plan in place, even though many organizations report that their senior leaders and board members are nearing retirement. So this gap really can threaten continuity. Another piece of evidence is that 42% of nonprofit CEOs in one province had been in their role in under 3 years, reflecting that there's high turnover. We've got some fragile leadership pipelines. And so what we need to think about is some of the best practice frameworks that can help us identify and groom future leaders well before these sort of transitions take place. This includes establishing written succession plans for emergencies and for planned departures, mentoring younger staff and volunteers, and then cross-training people so that no critical function in your organization, at your society, relies on one single person. Organizations that invest in leadership development and mentorship have much stronger continuity and smoother handovers. So a little bit on why succession planning matters. So as I've mentioned, only about 30-ish% of nonprofits have formal plans. That varies from province to province, but what it leads to is high turnover among volunteer leaders. It's very risky, where we lose a lot of knowledge when one person departs from an organization. And we really see that in small nonprofits that folks heavily rely on the passion and knowledge of one or two individuals. And if these individuals step down without a successor ready, the organization can flounder. in a recent survey that we did, only 12% of Ontario organizations felt confident that they had someone to fill key leadership roles if someone left, right? So the context here really matters. I think this is advice that I'm sharing with, nonprofits and grassroots groups. Anyone that'll listen, is having these plans in place early is so important to that continuity. So on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the succession planning framework. More information in the speaker notes when you have access to this slide deck afterwards. We have a couple of pieces to consider, right? Is the emergency succession planning. So having a document that outlines what to do if a leader leaves unexpectedly, right? Due to an illness or a resignation with little notice. It typically names an acting or interim leader or the process on how to designate one. It lists critical tasks, who can cover them, and has a communication plan for stakeholders. The National Council of Nonprofits advises every nonprofit to adopt an emergency leadership transition plan so that authority and duties are immediately clear in a crisis. We also want to think about planned succession strategies. So for anticipated transitions, so in roles that say have a term limit, it's wise to create a timeline and a process well in advance. And that timeline can then serve as a unemotional way of dealing with these transitions and bringing new people into these roles. The timelines can change and might be a bit longer for roles that you have a lot of notice for, and it might be a shorter plan that you need to make for roles that have a higher chance of rotation. If you are pulling people internally, it might look different as well with your succession planning. It might focus more on your timeline might focus more on training and gradually elevating that successor, but having a plan in place for how to bring someone totally new to the organization is also wise, just to think about how would you find people who are like highly specific skills and can serve in those kind of key functions. Another important piece is the cross training and documentation. So really making sure that the critical knowledge in an organization and that the critical relationships in an organization are shared beyond one person. So forward-thinking associations, they go ahead and they document those key processes. They have deputies or teams who shadow leaders in these essential areas. And as the Nonprofit Risk Management Center puts it, building resilience means avoiding a single point of failure. Have backups for important operations and leadership roles. When we think of leadership development and mentorship, I think of, how can you identify high potential individuals and actively prepare them for future leadership? This might involve sending them to leadership training, giving them tasks that kind of stretch their ability or pull them a little bit out of their role, or pairing them with the current leaders as mentees. That culture of mentorship helps transfer knowledge in a more smooth way. And it can really have that ripple effect beyond just the mentor and mentee, but can kind of open up those lines of communications within teams and within organizations, so that communication just flows more naturally. And again, when we think about bringing in a bunch of new younger volunteers, if they feel comfortable and they feel like they're in a culture of being supported, they will share their ideas, and they will know that that's kind of the culture that you're looking to have as part of your organization. Thinking a little bit about having diverse boards and committees. So diversity is really important in these boards and committees, diversity of personal experience, of skill sets, of different ages. It brings in, fresh perspectives. You kind of cover more ground. It will help you see your blind spots. Provincial profiles highlight that many boards are older and not reflective of community diversity, and it's urged that nonprofits and grassroots groups make targeted efforts to recruit underrepresented groups onto their boards. Including this in your plans can help future-proof that leadership. And one other thing that I'll say on succession planning framework is just updating governance policies. So you incorporate succession into your bylaws or your policies. For instance, have a policy that the vice chair is the presumptive interim chair if the chair can no longer serve, or that the executive director must develop an internal succession plan for key staff. Some organizations do conduct an annual talent review at the board level to discuss who could step up if needed. And it helps normalize that conversation. It reduces the stigma and, just keeps succession on the radar. Okay. What does that look like in practice, right? So you want to identify those essential functions and know which roles or tasks are absolutely critical and that they must continue without interruption to keep the organization running. This helps you prioritize your succession efforts on those critical areas. Having a leadership timeline looks like having protocols for interim leadership. So have a plan for who steps in temporarily to cover major roles, but not just top positions. Again, we're thinking about those critical roles so that you know who covers who, right? And where does that documentation exist? We want to engage younger members in that governance process so that they can grow into stronger leaders. They can help shape the organization and be part of those continuity efforts. Some organizations, they use board term limits, they have chair-elect roles. Each organization is going to have a different interpretation on how long to have people hold roles. I think I did see a comment kind of pop up on my screen there briefly. So it really does depend. But what I'm seeing a little bit is, anywhere from 1 to 3 years for roles is plenty, because then you end up with people kind of staunchly in these positions. They hold a lot of knowledge, and if there isn't proper planning in place or proper documentation in place, you can lose some of that critical knowledge if that person needs to step away. So the last piece for me in this section is some ideas to consider for OHA succession is just term lengths for those committee positions. Thinking about what's kind of a good amount of time will have to be discussed kind of within your groups. Matching older and younger people together. So can there be co-positions? Can it be a mentor-mentee sort of position? Again, this brings youth and younger members into that leadership role with more, respect and dignity, but it also is a risk management piece, right? For every committee member, maybe there's a younger mentor who then could step into that role if needed to. So those co-positions, they don't necessarily have to have that generational divide, but co-positions ensure that there is always someone available to step into key roles. They know where all the information is. They are connected to the right relationships, so that if need be, they can keep the show going. So the next section that I'll cover and is talking a little bit more about building long-term resilience within organizations. So organizational resilience does require addressing those first two challenges, right? So how to recruit and retain volunteers, how to do succession planning. And this helps fortify the organization's capacity to adapt. So volunteer-powered organizations are inherently at risk if volunteer engagement and leadership continuity, if they falter, as seen within COVID-19, we saw 62% of Ontario nonprofits that lost volunteers and half could not resume all services. So when we think about strengthening resilience, nonprofits are pursuing strategies like diversifying their volunteer base, so engaging with youth, families, newcomers to fill gaps. We think about modernizing volunteer management practices, So adopting online volunteer platforms, reinstating volunteer manager roles, which can boost retention up to 16x, and planning for continuity. So documenting processes, creating backup plans for sudden departures, and building financial reserve. At a sector level, there's a push to align with Volunteer Canada's best practices and initiatives. So we have our National Volunteer Action Strategy that's going to be coming out in 2026 that will continue to provide more support and understanding on how we can future-proof volunteerism and to give guidance and insight on how to build that infrastructure for resilient volunteer engagement across the country. So I'll talk a little bit about what is resilience within an organization. So it's the ability to adapt, survive, and thrive, responding to the shocks, right? Big ones being that we've seen a lot of things change during the pandemic. We've got demographic shocks that are happening, right? With many people who are retiring or retiring from volunteerism. We've got some gaps in leadership that we're seeing. So really what we want to see is that having a more heightened awareness of where our risk areas are, and that awareness it isn't abstract, right? It's survival. So for OHA and similar associations, resilience means being able to continue fulfilling your mission, promoting horticulture, engaging communities, despite volunteer turnover, financial ups and downs, or external crises. We'll talk a little bit about some of the pillars of organizational resilience. So a big one is having a robust volunteer engagement system. So having a stable core of volunteers and the ability to continually attract new members is really important. So having an enabling volunteer environment means that you have infrastructure that makes that easy. Makes it easy for people to participate, makes it easy for a volunteer manager to coordinate. And those processes and tools to recruit, train, and manage volunteers efficiently looks like having a good database, clear volunteer roles, recognition programs. It also means being inclusive, so reaching out to diverse groups to broaden your volunteer pool so that you're not overly dependent on one demographic. Something that I'm working on a lot at Volunteer Canada is, understanding the power of intergenerational connection. So having pairing younger and older volunteers together so that they can support one another and share knowledge is a great way to adapt to the volunteer crisis that a lot of us are going through, but it also serves to, address the loneliness epidemic that people have. So bringing people together of different generations, it's good for our health, but it's also good for organizational health. And resilient organizations are flexible. They monitor the changes in their environment and adapt programs or strategies accordingly. For example, during COVID, many charities pivoted to virtual programming and remote volunteering. Now, obviously, being out in the community is a big part of the work that you all do, but are there ways that you can stay engaged virtually with your members throughout the year, right? Whether it's offering training or having online social components, all of those sort of things, right? Is when new opportunities present themselves, how are you adapting and taking advantage of those opportunities to try new things, to try new approaches, and to learn even from your failures, right? That's the hallmark of a resilient culture. So encouraging experimentation on a small scale to continuously improve engagement is a great strategy to employ, right? Try new things. Try recruiting volunteers in places that you didn't that you wouldn't have thought of before. And if it's successful, then you know that that's a route to continue to explore. But you've got to have a bit of trial and error to stay resilient. And so beyond succession planning, thinking about good governance is crucial. So a well-functioning board that regularly engages in strategic planning, risk management, and oversight will foresee challenges and guide the organization through tough times. The nonprofit risk Management Center emphasizes fostering a culture of candor, trust, and mutual support within leadership. So really being clear with each other, being highly communicative, being okay to like address the elephant in the room. It's better to share these pieces openly rather than hide issues until they explode. And if organizations are honest with themselves about their weaknesses, you can take that corrective action early. So part of governance for resilience is monitoring key indicators like volunteer satisfaction, membership trends, financial ratios, and having contingency plans for disasters, loss of facility, etc. An organization might have a continuity plan for data and files. So what to do with backups and cloud storage, so that if a person or an office is inaccessible, the work can continue. These are, basic concepts, but they're often overlooked because we feel like we're under-resourced or we are under-resourced. But these investments into managing your risks have the ability to keep you on the train tracks a lot longer, and you're less likely to be derailed by any one risk. Partnerships and networks are the next section that I'll talk a little bit more about. So finding your peer networks are important. So if as a committee you've got bigger questions than I'm able to answer today, who are other peers in the sector who might have gone through this as well, right? Where can you go to kind of air some of your challenges or share your successes with other peers? Are you able to collaborate and connect with the local volunteer centers and municipalities? Sharing those resources and best practices with other societies at the OHA, I think, is also really great. And looking at, who you can partner with in the community for both volunteers and for just general support. So is there a local business that would like to have their employees get out and volunteer? Other clubs where you can share resources, partnering with schools and classrooms. These are all really important parts of staying resilient. And of course, that trickles down into, volunteer recruitment and retention there. So this is a little bit of a summary of the things that I've been talking about. So that succession bench is for the key volunteer roles. So having a plan in place for volunteer roles as well. So not just at a committee or a board level, but think of that stellar volunteer in your society. If they left, what would happen? And making sure that you're just aware of that and you're adapting and supporting yourself, even, so that if they did leave, you're able to kind of pick up the slack and get things back on track. A great way to do this is to go through those what if exercises, right? So what if this person left, what would happen? Or what if, and have that conversation with a couple of your colleagues, and it can really help you identify where your risks are, and then come up with response strategies. Investing in the volunteer coordinator position. It's so critical to have a person who is in charge clearly on scheduling and recruiting and retaining volunteers. We all have a role to play in retaining volunteers, and we can all actually have a role in recruiting, but having a dedicated coordinator, you're just going to be so much more successful. The data does not lie. Capturing knowledge. So, having those procedure notes for recurring activities, having playbooks. If you see someone doing something really well within your society, sitting down and having an informational interview with them. So many people do the work that they're supposed to do so well that it becomes second nature, and they add in things that maybe just aren't in the normal to-do list. So get curious with different roles that people have. And thinking about well-being and burnout. So really striking that healthy balance where you're rotating roles, you are checking in on your high-performing volunteers and members, and just really making sure that they're not overextended for a long period of time, because they often are the ones who help us pick up the slack, right, when things change or get challenging. So that is kind of the last slide. before answering questions. I have a summary slide that says like the key takeaways, but I've seen just so many great questions come in, so I just want to be able to work on that piece now.
Eleonora Schmidt says, what do you think should be the ideal time frame for a person to be in a role?
Yeah, so as I was mentioning later on in the presentation was 1 to 3 years for certain positions. You can even, what I've seen at some organizations is they'll have a 2-year term, but it'll be a co-position. And so when you've got 2 people serving on the same role, having an opportunity for it to be overlapped so that you're not having 2 people in a role who then leave at the same time. So that's a part of succession planning as well, right? You've got kind of that, there's always someone in that co-position who's done it before the other person. But I think without knowing specifically what the role is and its importance within your society and within the OHA, it's hard for me to specifically say. It's just you don't want to end up with people in critical positions for so many years that that if they step away, it becomes this derailing moment for an organization. So having rotating roles is just about keeping that energy up, right? Because if you know this role is only 2 years long, you better have good training for it and good documentation for it, because you know that someone else is going to have to step into it. So what it does is it just primes organizations to be thinking about that constantly, and that you don't end up with all the knowledge up here. The knowledge of any one role is accessible to the rest of a team.
Susan McMillan's question is, can you expand on investing in volunteer infrastructure?
Yes. And so the investing is, more than just a monetary investment, which might look like, just a certain computer program to help manage things, or actually hiring someone for that volunteer role. But investing also just means in the time that is required, investing time into that volunteer infrastructure. So thinking about how you are recruiting your volunteers, retaining them, recognizing them, all of those important parts of a volunteer's experience are a worthwhile investment. And coming together as a team and seeing maybe where the weak parts are within that volunteer life cycle will give you some good indicators on where do we maybe need to invest first.
Okay. Allison Dunn asked, do you have any resources or recommended reading on building a succession plan and creating a volunteer development plan? Also, you mentioned having an accessible online platform for volunteering. What platform would you recommend?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of different platforms depending on the sizes of organizations. I'm happy to actually take this question with me and follow up with some of my team members who are much more knowledgeable about the actual platforms, so that I can include it in my notes to Kelly, who will then disperse that with each of you. With my previous jobs, what I've done is I've used tools like Airtable. I found that to be a really helpful way to schedule people into roles. It was like, that's where they could sign up to be a volunteer, they could sign up for certain events, etc.
Okay. Leanne Crane says Society, District, and the OHA newsletter are great ways to share your successes and ideas. Submissions need to be ongoing. How do you recommend addressing a room full of people who just want to be entertained and not contribute?
Hey, I mean, I worked with young people for 12 years. I mean, I think that's a common assumption, is like, oh, people just want to be entertained, but um it's really just about getting ahead of this, right? So of course people want to be entertained, but I think more importantly, they want to feel like what they're doing is making sense and that they're there for a reason. So if I was feeling like people were not wanting to contribute, I might employ a number of different tactics. What are small ways that people can contribute in that room? So that you're not feeling like, hey, I have to welcome everybody. I set up all the snacks. I led the meeting and did all of that. Are there small ways that people can step into the roles? Like, hey, thanks for getting here a few minutes early. Do you mind doing the attendance on the way in? Right? What are like those small activities so that it's like, I have a purpose for being here, and I'm not an audience member, but I'm actually part of this community.
Excellent. Jill Cutter from Orangeville says, hi from Orangeville. Basically the same question as Leanne above. We have great volunteers, definitely for one-time or one-day projects. But our problem is finding leaders to oversee our positions. Example is chair of the garden group, maintaining town gardens, chair plant sale, chair of the flower shows, chair of the garden tours, etc. And of course, the board positions. We definitely welcome, appreciate, and mentor. New members are busy with many other interests, just love to come out to our meetings. Realistically, everywhere, 10% of the members in any type of group do the work.
Yep. And thank you, Jill, for your comment there. I think this is probably where that personal invitation really comes into play. So, at the end of a great meeting, saying, hey, if anybody wants to help lead the chair plant, if anyone wants to chair the plant sale, or if anybody wants to chair the flower show, if you're finding that that's not getting the attention, it's because you end up with this like waterfall moment where no one raises their hand, so then nobody else wants to raise their hand. And so what I've done personally, and what I've seen other volunteer managers employ, is the personal invitation, right? Or even, again, pairing two people up. So maybe that one of your members has only been really coming to meetings, and they just haven't stepped into anything bigger, and talk about why you think they would be great for the role, the sort of impact that it would be, and the sort of commitment that's required. Are there ways that this could be a bite-sized position, like where there's two people doing it, like anything that you can do to kind of slowly pull them in? And that personal invite really does go the long way. I was thinking of you, and here's why.
If people say you're doing too good of a job, what can you do to encourage other people to step up?
Yeah, I mean, it sometimes is a good problem to have, right? Like, okay, so I'm doing my job too good, but then everyone thinks you're the go-to person for problem solving, for project tasks. So it's really about getting honest with the other members that you're interacting with. Hey folks, I've already got a lot on my plate here. We're going to need somebody else to step into this position for plant sale, or for the flower sale, right? And so really being clear on your boundaries, right? It's great when we feel good in a role, and the natural feeling is like, yeah, it's just one more thing, when you're already busy and doing it. But you really have to protect your time so that you're not experiencing the burnout as well, and really employ those personal invitations to folks.
Christine Marsh asks, how do we recruit younger volunteers whose lives are already consumed by work and family?
Yep. Big question, right? We've got young people who have different schedules around the year. Then we've got the people who have, just started their families. So are there ways that we can be flexible in how they are able to participate? So people who have a family, are they able to bring their children with them, right? If you're finding that, a bunch of your members are no longer able to make it because they can't find babysitting, or they're not able to participate for those sort of reasons, can you offer child minding at your meetings, or your special events? Are there ways that their children can participate and just be on site? recruiting younger volunteers, can be really challenging just with like their schedules, and their lives change every few years. But there's lots of ways to do it, right? Bring a friend, help them know the impact of what they're making, buddy them up with a mentor so that they really feel like they're learning. Yeah, those are just a couple of things that pop into my head when I think about bringing in younger members who want to commit often, but then they can't, right? Like, it's hard for them to commit long term. And I mean, that's a very, very common struggle with that age range, because their lives are just changing so much. It's hard to commit.
Okay. Allison Dunn says, thank you. It's so appreciated. Robin Burns says, sign up, genius. Offers a free platform for events and roles, etc. Eleanor Schmidt says, we find that members like to come and help, but they don't want to lead. They like micro-volunteering project, but not long-term commitments. Flexibility and short-term roles are more welcome than sitting on a board for 2 or 3 year role on the board.
Yeah, and I would say that that's a common sentiment that people have. And so, it's how can we make these, or how can we have these board positions not feel so intimidating or feel like they are this huge commitment, right? Really get real with people about what does being a board member actually look like. Realistically, in a year, over the course of a year, or over the course of 6 months, how many hours would that person have to contribute? And be very upfront and honest with them. I think when people read certain words like board member, it might be intimidating even. So really helping people understand and manage their expectations on the role might get you away from a no to a maybe, right? And then with that maybe, you can sit them down and explain the role in a little bit more detail.
Okay. Susan Goyer says some younger people seem to have trouble transitioning from the digital world to the real world. Not sure if it's due to shyness, etc. How do we encourage them to step out, feel confident? Thank you.
Yeah, Susan, I definitely, I can see, I can see in my mind what the picture that you've painted there. And there's a link that I'll include in my follow-up notes with Kelly, and it's called what young volunteers want and don't want from older allies. And it's just a recent report that came out. But one of the areas that really struck me in that report was that young people really look to the older and long-term members to set the pace for them, to set the tone. So being welcoming, knowing everybody's name, following up with a couple of personal details that they have met, letting them know that you believe in them, that they can do a task, and if they need help, you're right there with them, right? Like, what can we be doing to kind of put these safety nets around some of our younger members so that when they show up, they feel confident? Don't assume that they'll ask a question, even if they need to ask it. So, doing that check-in, seeing how they are. And that's why sometimes having like these formalized mentor and mentee roles can be really helpful, so that there's someone just really taking keeping an eye on and keeping the younger members under our wings. And I think a little bit of coaching and compliments can really empower a young person.
Robin Brennan has a suggestion. Having itemized plans for running events, example, a flower show or a plant sale, is very helpful. So many people who have ran these events long term just do it from past experience or memory. These things need to be documented, all the steps, etc. So people won't seem so overwhelmed when they have to start from scratch.
Yes, absolutely, Robin. And thanks for putting that suggestion in there. That really echoes, hopefully, one of the messages that you've heard from me tonight, which is, that documentation and that knowledge transfer process, it not only helps reduce risk, but it helps manage the stress of our volunteers, right? why have someone, start from scratch when there's either someone within their team or in another area of Ontario who knows how to do it, right? So how can we help people not feel very overwhelmed by these multi-pronged processes? So thank you for sharing that, Robin.
Debbie Grant says, I think most of us can relate to the question regarding a membership who wants to entertain versus commitment to projects. Personally, I feel members need to feel that they are invested within the group, that what they are doing is not only for fun, but contributing to a worthy cause, i.e., the environment. Fun is an important element.
Yes, yeah. I think having those impact statements is so important, right? Oh, we're doing a plant sale. Why? Like, is it a fundraiser? Are the plants for pollinator gardens? Like, helping people see the big picture of how is me sitting at a booth doing this specific activity, contributing to the greater good, contributing to the environment in a way that I feel aligned to. So giving people those key messages, right? What are those yeah, like those 3 bullet points that you could have for someone when you're asking them to get into a role, so that when they tell their family and their friends and their colleagues, hey, I'm doing this volunteer role, you've got those 3 key messages that they can share to other people as well, right? They want to feel like what they're doing as volunteers is part of their identity. So being really clear on what that impact looks like, they can embed that into how they feel the experience is going. And I think, it stands to reason that then they would, invest back, and maybe not do everything that feels fun, because they understand, hey, this is in the bigger picture of things. This is how this task helps us meet that goal.
Okay. Cheryl Penner says, we watched a video called something like Why Gardening Clubs Are Dying. It caused us at Agincourt to change a few things, i.e., new members feel the regular belonging to cliques instead of reaching out to them.
Yep.
So
See, and that's a little bit about that. It's not just first impressions, but it's those first moments, right? So you've got a new person coming into your group. They've signed up. They did the form. They've paid their membership dues, whatever the process looks like for that person. But they're still new, right? And so, are we going out of our way to pull them in? I love when I'm social with my friends when I'm out volunteering, but that newcomer really needs that added support. It's part of the experience that they're looking for too. And when they see people having fun and feeling a bit ignored from that, it's a bit of a turnoff for them, right? So just really being mindful of how we have those social dynamics with other members is really important. I think you've brought up an excellent point there, Cheryl.
So Cheryl continues that they start their meetings with boring, new to new members, business news. So now we have speakers first and the meeting news later, i.e., you go to a new club and no one even says hello. Project managers rule like little dictators when people are volunteers, i.e., one person belonged to a club for 10 years, but then her husband died. No one gave her any condolences, just some examples.
Yeah, I think really being aware of how we make other people feel in these teams are important, right? We're all humans trying to do the right thing. We're wanting to make the environment a better place, right? So when we think about a volunteer's experience, right, being really mindful of that, the hellos when people walk in the door, wanting to know what's going on in your team member's life, so you can either celebrate them or support them, right? In the example that Cheryl provided there. Yeah, really, really good points to think about. I encourage all of you to think deeply about those comments that Cheryl has made.
Catherine Bates, newer volunteers may find that established volunteers want help doing things as they've been doing them, as they've always been done, and struggles with openness to doing different things or same things in a new way. Suggestions on how this can be negotiated.
Yeah, so something that I've done with my volunteer programs is we'll have design sessions. And so essentially what that is we'll look at a regular event that we host on a yearly basis. We run through the to-do list, the process of how it's done, and people can chime in at that point. Sometimes people think they have, ideas that can improve something, but with the knowledge from the older members, from the people who have been there longer, they might find, hey, those regular members from a couple years ago, they tried that, and here's why it didn't work, right? So it's about, if it is a no, can you empower people to know why? Right. And then even if it's a no to this new idea, you're still focusing on openness, right? Here's us being transparent about what works and what doesn't, being honest. And these co-design sessions can be really important, especially if then that event or that process is asking people to be part of it. So that is one of the strategies that I've personally employed.
Excellent. Pat from Tilsonburg states that they have a recruiting team to recruit for board positions. Last year, they introduced 2 directors at large positions to encourage stepping up to a director portfolio. We struggle with new volunteers.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're on the right track then by having a recruiting team to look for those board positions, and then maybe it's about employing a similar strategy for the volunteers, and thinking about maybe coming together as a team and thinking about any trends that you've noticed, dynamics that are going on. I think in the spirit of, being open and honest, having these conversations help reduce that stigma of talking about what's wrong. We don't want to come from a place of blame or shame, but we also want to be real. What's going on in the dynamics of our particular group? And, what can we do to be role models ourselves, and B, help the people who are maybe struggling, people who are feeling alone in these teams, people who want to be here but don't know how to step up to it, right? As leaders in these groups, we also have a responsibility to take action and not just assume things will just work out with time. Sometimes we really do have to address things. So yeah, it sounds like you're on the right track there, Pat, and just employing some of those same strategies at the volunteer level.
Jill Cutter suggests a good job description and planning to mentor the new person, as well as trying to simplify the role. Hopefully in the long term, it will work. Volunteering must be fun. Thank you for your presentation.
Thanks, Jill. Yeah, it's thinking about it as kind of like a graduating process, right? We want people to get in the door and start with, engaging with other members and small tasks. And then we think about that development plan. So where else might that person be able to support? What niches do they have and special strengths? And then, then you can ask for more time and for more support from people. But yes, volunteering must be fun.
So Salo has a suggestion about engaging younger members. She is a younger member and on the executive. Assume competency. We feel that our more senior members expect little of us, or that we aren't capable in the real world. We won't be interested in stepping up. Show support.
Appreciate that, Salo. Well said. I have nothing to say to amplify that further. Take that one to heart there, folks.
So that's the end of the questions in the chat. Did you want to conclude with something, Lily?
No, just thank you for having me. I have a couple of follow-up tasks for myself so that I can have a few more direct links, and I'll continue to pass that piece of information on to Kelly. And just thank you so much for having me, and all the best.
Lily, thank you so much for being with us this evening. And we look forward to the slides, and we look forward to your notes. There's a lot of thank yous coming up on the chat right now. I'd also like to thank Doris Casson for arranging tonight's session, and for Kelly and all her work of pulling it all together. Once again, volunteers are amazing and they pull it all together. So thank you from all of us, Lily. And thank you,
Thank you.
Doris.
Have a good evening.